Okay, I think we'll get going on the hour. Welcome, everyone. I'm Geth Davis, Key Account Specialist at Cloud Essentials, and I'll be your host today. So for those of you who are regulars to our monthly webinars, we're going to be doing it slightly differently today, which we're all pretty excited about. You can tell by our faces. We'll see how excited we are at the end. So instead of a traditional webinar, we're going to go for a more roundtable style discussion. So less slides, more conversation. We're hoping it's going to feel like you're sat in the room with us, listening in on the kind of, I suppose, the strategic conversations that we have with clients every day. You might be thinking, why this format? Reason is when we talk about ROI with Microsoft Purview, it's never just one perspective. It's a blend of, technical, compliance, governance, and commercial thinking. And that's exactly what we brought together today on our panel. So on that note, let me introduce our panel. Each of them brings deep sort of expertise from a Cloud Essentials perspective, but also each represents the real world personas we encounter when helping build their ROI case for Microsoft Purview and data governance in general. So we've got with us Johan van Schalkwijk, MD and Head of Solutions, speaks to the IT and security personas, so those responsible for deploying and securing the tech. We've got Nivasha Sanilal, Head of Compliance. She brings the voice of the governance and privacy personas, so the people ensuring that we meet regulatory and ethical standards. We've got Chris Hathaway on the call, so Director of Data Governance, sits at the sort of intersection, if you like, of strategy and execution, and often bridging that gap between the sort of tech side and the governance side. And then we've got Georgia Moyles as well, Commercial Director, brings the commercial lens. So he's the one asking those questions around, what's the business case here and what's the return? And I think why this style today is also relevant is because these are the exact sort of personas that we bring together in what we call our compliance panel. So it's a key part of our methodology and something that Nivasha and the team will cover in more detail later in our discussions. And it's a model that helps our clients sort of accelerate decision making, if you like, and unlock real value from their Microsoft investment. And then another reason for this style is that it's a session off the back of an ebook that we've developed called Quantifying the Value of Microsoft Purview. We'll be referencing this new ROI toolkit throughout the session. We'll also share this with you after the session so you can explore some of these tools and questions in a bit more detail as well. You may have some thoughts or questions as we converse. So in the interest of it being sort of interactive, if you like, so drop those through in the chat and we'll come to those as the relevant points during the conversation as well. Before we get into it, though, just a quick background on Cloud Essentials, because there might be some people on here today that don't know too much. So just a quick reference point, Cloud Essentials are a long-standing and dedicated Microsoft 365 partner, specialize in the areas of content management, so help organizations mature their approach in areas like reducing the risk profile of your content in M365, migrating and managing the content cost effectively, and ultimately opening up the value in content so you can surface it to your business advantage, especially in today's AI landscape. We're a highly skilled multidisciplinary team that also have expertise in areas around sort of Power Platform application development, expertise around Azure, where we provide professional and managed services. We also dive into the world of e-discovery as well. So our experience comes from, the complex work that we do with our customers. So we always talk through the lens of, lessons learned, which I think is, key to our expertise and what we'll hear about today. We've been there and done it, and we've learned along the way. So if any of these topics are interesting, or if you need help from, the experts, then please do come and talk to us about those as well. Okay, let's get going with our panel style discussion. We're going to start with, I guess, why ROI is important from, and why Purview matters. And I'm going to come to you first, Johan, on this one. I guess from your perspective in, IT security, what would you say is the biggest missed opportunity when Purview is underutilized?
Thanks, Kees. The biggest opportunity when Microsoft Purview is underutilized is a chance to turn data governance and security into a strategic advantage. From an IT perspective, Purview offers automation, integration, visibility across the Microsoft ecosystem. And if you're not utilizing it fully, you're still relying on fragmented tools and a manual process that increases cost and complexity. From a security standpoint, this missed opportunity is even more critical. I think Purview enables proactive risk detection, like insider risk threats and compliance violations. If those capabilities aren't activated, you're not just missing out on protection, you're all increasing your exposure to data breaches, regulatory fines, and potential reputational damage. But beyond risk and cost, underutilization, from my perspective, means you're not unlocking the full value of your data. Purview not only protects your data, but helps you ensure your data um, is also usable, enabling better decision making, AI readiness, and operational agility. And I think that's the real opportunity. Not only utilizing Purview for governance, but also to empower your organization.
Yeah, it's interesting, Johan. And I guess a couple of things you mentioned there were automation and integration. Can you expand on that a little bit? How do you see automation and integration driving ROI for technical teams? Some of those might be on the call.
Yeah, sure, Gethin. Automation and integration are two of the biggest return on investment drivers for technical teams that are utilizing Microsoft Purview. From an IT and securities perspective, automation reduces the manual burden of compliance and security tasks. Things like data subject access requests, data classification, and even incident responses. With Purview, that means fewer hours spent on repetitive work and more time focused on strategic initiatives. Integration is also powerful because Purview is natively embedded in Microsoft ecosystem. It works seamlessly across Teams, SharePoint, Exchange, and OneDrive, and even external sources and structured data sources like Azure Blob Storage or SQL servers. And that unified approach eliminates the need for patching together disparate tools. It also reduces the complexity and ensures consistent policy enforcement across your full data estate. Together, automation and integration not only lowers operational costs, but also improve accuracy, reduce risk, and accelerate time to value. For technical teams, that's a win across the board.
Yeah, that's interesting, Johan. So what I guess from listening to that, what springs to mind for me is you talk about sort of integrations and automations, and what springs to mind is speed. So I suppose on that note, can you, and I think the audience will be keen on this as well, can you share a quick win that's had a big impact for, one of our clients, for example?
Yeah, sure. I think one of our clients, a multinational across dispersed geographic regions across Africa, Europe, and Americas, they saw immediate value by implementing default sensitivity labeling and information protection early in their Purview journey. These features allowed them to classify and protect sensitive data across their Microsoft 365 estate without disrupting user workflow or business operations. The deployment was guided by our compliance panel, which helped align technical implementation with business priorities. This panel brought together stakeholders from IT, security, and compliance to make fast, informed decisions and ensure the labeling strategy matched the organization's risk profile and regulatory obligations. The result was rapid improvements in compliance maturity, reduced manual effort by setting default security and encryption on all new content generated, and then overall a security posture. And because of this quick win, they built momentum for broader Purview adoption, ultimately contributing to a significant higher ROI from their Microsoft license investment.
Cool. Okay, great. Thanks, Johan. I'm sure there's many in the audience that are happy to hear about those quick wins. I think from my perspective and talking to clients, it's another way of getting that early buy-in, I suppose, across the organization. Something that can be visible and quick to almost prove that you're headed in the right direction and there's purpose behind what you're doing, I suppose. I guess just moving on now from the technical side to more on the compliance. So Nivasha, I'm going to come over to you for this. What would you say is the governance risk of not having a centralized compliance strategy?
Thanks, Get. I think that's an interesting one because while both approaches, so both the decentralized as well as the centralized compliance strategy, they each have their benefits and pitfalls, as with many strategies, you know. However, in the absence of a centralized compliance strategy, what we often find in our experience is that there is fragmented or inconsistent compliance efforts across the organization. And that obviously then creates this increased risk of regulatory breaches or data mishandling. So a central strategy we found really helps to ensure that all compliance activities and efforts are aligned and monitored and managed effectively, therefore inevitably reducing the likelihood and the risk of gaps in your process, as well as just ensuring that there is this cohesive approach toward your governance. So basically everyone's on the same page as you, work towards your governance risk.
Yeah, makes complete sense. And so from a Purview perspective, then, how does Microsoft Purview help governance teams stay ahead of that, ever changing landscape, I suppose, in terms of regulatory changes?
Yeah, so obviously being in the GRC world, it's all about proactive compliance, not proactive monitoring. And one thing that Microsoft Purview does really well to help you stay ahead is that it provides this real-time insight as well as automated policy updates. So obviously that then ensures that an organization, when using Purview effectively, is always compliant or is always aware rather of the latest regulations and then can quickly adapt their controls or be made aware. And I think that's often the gap, this lack of awareness. And again, it highlights Purview's effectiveness in being able to quickly identify the change that will apply to your organization and then help you then adapt and amend your controls to make sure that you're still compliant. So the platform also provides comprehensive reporting and monitoring capabilities that, when used correctly, will really help you proactively manage your compliance and your regulatory changes.
Okay, and then I suppose what would be, if you had to give sort of one feature that you think governance teams, should be using right now, what would be your advice on that, Natasha?
So I think often we look at the regulatory landscape and we worry about compliance fines and obviously fines and penalties are really important, but what about what's happening within the organization? And I think that's where insider risk management is severely underutilized because this feature really helps to mitigate potential insider threats by monitoring user activities as well as then flagging any suspicious behaviors. So by leveraging this, an organization can proactively address any risks and then also ensure that their data remains secure.
Perfect. Thanks, Natasha. Chris, I'm going to come to you next. You've said before in many conversations that I've been involved in, and you mentioned it in actually our new ebook as well, that data governance should be a what you call a strategic enabler. I'm going to ask you just to expand on that a little bit to start with.
Yeah, I mean, I think technology itself is largely a strategic enabler, and the reality is that if you can't get the governance in place, it often retards the deployment or the use of really strategic tools which are going to help you from a business and efficiency and productivity perspective. We saw this in COVID where it really forced people to start working remotely and use Teams and be able to work on mobile, because before that the adoption was very slow because of the fear of this world with no security boundaries, and people needed to get their heads around how to control a mobile first world. I think we're seeing the same thing again now with AI and generative AI deployment. We see lots of generative AI deployments being stalled or retarded because the governance and legal teams just aren't convinced, and like all things, technology is a double-edged sword. It facilitates, but it also facilitates risk in many respects. So yeah, really important to be able to use technology to control technology. It is it is impossible to deploy serious governance tools that give teeth to governance policies without using technology. It can't be done manually. A policy on its own is just that. It's just words in a document. You really need to be able to give those words teeth, and that requires technology to be an enabler.
Yeah, makes sense. And sort of moving on from that, then it leads me to ask the question around, balancing and enabling innovation with enforced controls. How do you balance that?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's always that fear that too much control is going to disrupt daily business activities. And one of the sort of maybe slightly ironically, one of the sessions we do a lot with our customers when we're going through a compliance program is Han actually runs an Art of the Possible program. And the Art of the Possible program is really for key stakeholders, knowledge owners, usually people who haven't had sight of the technology. Often we find, yes, you might be preaching to the converted when it comes to explaining and understanding what tools like Purview can do for you. But actually the key stakeholders, the people who really understand the information we're trying to protect, actually are totally unaware. And in many cases, they actually just don't believe that the protections can be effective and also not, be a disruption to daily business workflow. So the Art of the Possible session really gets non-technical people who really understand and really need to be involved in the process to understand how the information can be protected, but still remain useful to the business and business requirements.
Yeah, for sure. Okay. And you mentioned, you touched on AI a second ago. What's your take on, the role of governance? I mean, it's been spoke about a lot recently, but what's your take on that role of governance in AI readiness from your standpoint?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the reality is, and we've seen this in even as search has progressed, is it's the needle in the haystack. If you can't find the needle in the haystack, it's kind of less of a concern. It doesn't really come to mind as often. But what generative AI has really done is it's given people the ability to ask a question and get a really thorough answer, particularly if that generative AI is looking at your own enterprise information, which tools like Copilot do, and they're very effective at. So all of a sudden, you can surface potentially unwanted information from a really innocuous question may surface a lot of information. Not only that, when people are generating new information, that information can be used to generate now net new information, which is what we call in the wild. So yeah, I think having that control is really critical to AI readiness, being sure that you are ready, you do have the governance controls in place. There are really sophisticated, great tools which still enable the use of AI. We actually land up with a sort of 3 levels, which I like to usually go through and explain. And that's, information which can be traditionally protected by role-based access control and access to an area, a place. But then there's also information which needs to be protected no matter where it lands up. So for example, if it is generated into a new document, a new message through AI, that protection follows, and it doesn't matter where it gets saved or whose machine or mobile device it lands up on, it's protected wherever it lives, so it follows it. And then the last level, which is the most severe level, is some information just has no business being available to the generative AI and should be protected from it. Highly sensitive personal information, for example, there's no business gain to that information being made available to the generative AI, so don't make it available. Potentially things like board minutes, although that one can sometimes be subjective. But these are examples, and you really need to create a layer cake and make sure your governance tools and reporting and monitoring is in place, so that you can keep things going, and so ultimately business can make use of the advantages.
Yeah, that's definitely some good advice there. And so I'm just going to move on to George now in terms of the commercial side of things. George, if you look at it from a commercial lens, how would you say you justify investment in Purview, for example, for stakeholders?
I think just adding to some of what's been highlighted already, justifying the spend to stakeholders involves highlighting its comprehensive capabilities in data governance, compliance, and security. By consolidating multiple tools under Purview, we reduce licensing costs, we simplify operations, we improve data accuracy. This not only lowers operational costs, but it enhances our ability to protect sensitive data and comply with regulations, ultimately leading to a high return on investment. In many cases, we also have customers that have already bought Purview and it's included in their licensing. And for those customers, it's purely a case of activating it. And then the ROI is even more impressive. So we're seeing a very strong return on investment.
Yeah, thanks, George. That's a really interesting intake and great insights from all of you there. So I guess to summarize just that section, I think what I'm hearing is that ROI isn't just, technical or regulatory. It's strategic, it's cultural, it's and commercial. And that complexity ties into how we do this at Cloud Essentials, which has been learned through experience as well. So thanks for those initial insights. I'm going to move it on now to discuss some of the toolkit that we've put together in our ebook to try and get down to, I guess, more of the nitty-gritty side of things of building and quantifying the value of Microsoft Purview and data governance strategies. So moving on to some of these toolkits, which you can see on the screen on the slide, we're going to start with a little bit of what George touched upon there, which is unlocking the value from license spend. So Johan, back to you on that. How would you say you assess whether an organization is getting full value from, say, its E5 licensing, for example?
Thanks, Gaten. To assess whether an organization is getting full value from the Microsoft 365 E5 licensing, we look at both utilization and outcomes. From an IT and security perspective, the first step is to evaluate how many of the Purview included features like data loss prevention, insider risk management, or compliance manager are actually being deployed and in use. Many organizations have access to these tools but haven't activated them, which means they aren't really realizing the value and full return on their licensing spend. We also assess whether Purview is replacing redundant third-party tools. If you are still paying for external data loss prevention or compliance solutions that Purview could handle natively, that's a clear sign of underutilization. Finally, we look at outcomes. Are manual tasks being automated? Are compliance risk being reduced? Are you seeing measurable improvements in productivity, decision-making, and risk posture? If any of the answers is no, then there's likely untapped value in your E5 or other Microsoft 365 license investments.
Yeah, and I guess off the back of that then, Johan, what would you say is the risk then of leaving Purview features, dormant, just sat there?
Yeah, I think dormant features carries both financial and operational risks. From an IT perspective, it means you're not getting the full value of your Microsoft investment. You're paying for capabilities, as I mentioned, information security, data loss prevention, even compliance manager, but you're not using them. That is wasted budget and missed opportunities to streamline operations and reduce tool sprawl. From a security standpoint, the risk is even more serious. Dormant features means blind spots, potentially. Areas where sensitive data, your crown jewels, is not being classified or monitored, how it's being shared externally or even exploited accidentally or maliciously. That increases the likelihood of data breaches, insider threats, and non-compliance with regulations like GDPR or PAPIA. And when something goes wrong, the cost of inaction can be far greater than the cost of implementation. So the real risk is twofold. You're not just underutilizing a powerful platform, you're leaving your organization more exposed, and that it needs to be.
Yeah, it makes sense. And I guess a lot of people on the call are probably just starting off, Johan. So I guess what would your advice be for teams that are, just starting out on this journey?
Yeah, I think for teams and organizations just starting out with Microsoft Purview, with most of the enterprise licenses, you can enable some of the important Purview features. But it's important not to try everything at once. Start with quick wins that deliver visible value. For example, implement default sensitivity labeling or templatized data loss prevention policies early. These are relatively easy to deploy and immediately improves your data protection posture. Second to that, set up a governance structure like our compliance panel. It brings together IT, security, and business stakeholders to align priorities, make faster decisions, and ensure that Purview adoption is strategically aligned, not just a technical tool that is implemented. And finally, don't underestimate the value of external support. Programs and partners like Cloud Essentials can help you avoid common pitfalls, and accelerate your deployment to build momentum. Yeah, so the key is, from my perspective, start small, show impact, and then scale with confidence from there.
Yeah, thanks, Johan. And that's sound advice. And again, I know it comes from experience with our customers, which is important. Chris, I'm going to come back to you on this. If I asked you, how do you help clients, map their, say, there might be some clients on here with E3 thinking about E5. How would you say we help clients map their E3 to E5 journey?
Yeah, and I'm sort of just thinking about what Johan's just taken us through, and also the words that always ring from Navasha here. And compliance is a people, process, and then technology ongoing journey. It's not something you set and forget. And I think that the E3 to E5 journey, the E3 license, as Johan's already said, offers a lot of functionality and features. So depending where you are on your kind of compliance journey, there may be a lot there for you to get started with. And maybe the one thing you sort of alluded to, that is, there's a lot of intelligence we gather. So once you've got a panel, once you can report on, even if you're on the E3 licensing, even if you're using manual labeling, we can see what's been labeled, where the information is, how effective it's been. You learn a lot, and it helps you a lot towards the more complex licensing that comes with that can come with E5 licensing. So yeah, I mean, I think get started with what you've got. This obviously depends on where you are in your journey, but there's a lot that can be done, like translating your policies into where the technology can actually enforce those policies. So there's a lot of work that can be done on an E3 license. So yeah, depending where you are on that continuum, you may still be okay with the E3 license, and you will then also know when you're likely to need the E5 license as you move on.
And would you say there's a tipping point on that, Chris, in terms of that upgrade? And if there is, where would that be?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think we often see the tipping point has already been reached, because the E5 license was particularly well adopted and sold through the cybersecurity side. So I think cybersecurity, in many respects, is more internal IT. IT can kind of get it done without too much assistance from the rest of the business. So many of our customers actually bought E5 licenses already, are using the cybersecurity elements, but haven't deployed the Purview elements yet. And that really just means that you've actually already reached that tipping point, because you've bought a whole lot of really, really sexy functionality that you're just not using. And so that's definitely the one tipping point. And then the other tipping point is, as I'm sure Johan will always talks about, is when you get to that point where you've learned enough, you've got enough telemetry, but now you're wanting to automate things. And particularly, if you're starting to look at things like generative AI deployments, you really need this automated protection and the machine's ability to apply that protection. That's when you really need to start looking at the E5 license and the more advanced features in Purview. The other area is with e-discovery, perhaps, depending on where you are with that, but advanced e-discovery is a big difference between the standard e-discovery and advanced e-discovery. But it's probably another topic. But yeah, those are the tipping points for me.
Yeah, interesting. I'm not sure I've heard it described as sexy before, Chris. So that's an interesting one.
Yeah. It's a bit
I'm gonna
sad,
move-
really.
George, I come to you again. How would you say you quantify this unused value that we're talking about in terms of, the commercial side of things?
Well, I think we've estimated the different elements of a Microsoft Enterprise license using the add-on costs in relation to the base costs. And although there's a process that's somewhat subjective, it provides insights into the costs associated with the cybersecurity pieces and with the Purview tools. And as well as that, we then identify the costs incurred when these tools are not utilized at all. So we can put a number to it and allocate different pieces, but a lot of customers are leaving pieces unused, and they'll see the value very quickly or the cost.
Absolutely makes sense. Okay, interesting. I'm going to move on to the next section around considerations for displacing alternative solutions. And I think we're going to talk about that in a slightly different way. So for this section, I think it's more important to talk about the importance of the Microsoft ecosystem, where we specialize and why that brings its own benefits when it comes to data governance. So Johan, back to you on this. I'm going to ask the question, but I know you're going to answer it slightly differently to how I'm asking it. But in terms of legacy tools, which ones are most commonly replaced by Purview, or more importantly, why do organizations look at Microsoft Purview as their solution?
Yeah, sure, Gethan. I think rather than just focusing on specific legacy tools and naming them in list order, I think it's more important to understand why organization can replace them with Microsoft Purview. And I think the key reason is, as you mentioned, the ecosystem and the consolidation solution that Microsoft Purview brings. So Purview brings together a lot of capabilities, as I mentioned before, DLP, e-discovery, insider risk management, but importantly, not only within your Microsoft 365 ecosystem, but you can also extend that to external data sources and even move from unstructured sources like emails and files and SharePoint to even applying those classifications and protection solutions across structured data sources through Azure Purview connectors. And as I mentioned before, you can apply classification in SQL databases and even some protection that each of these connectors support. So really tying those ecosystems together. So that brings it means fewer tools to manage, fewer integrations, and points to maintain. And Purview, it brings a more unified view of your data governance and security posture. So this consolidation really brings a reduction in licensing cost. It simplifies operations, improve overall accuracy because of the single glass pane solution that comes with Purview. So instead of managing separate platforms, for example, email archiving, file analysis, and compliance reporting, Purview can handle all those three solutions natively, automatically applying policies across areas like SharePoint, Exchange, Teams, but also have a compliance dashboard with Compliance Manager. So Purview really brings value and it isn't just replacing tools. It's really replacing fragmentation with cohesion. And I think that's really where the return on investment really starts to scale fast.
Yeah, definitely. And I guess the next natural question from there for me is, how do you ensure that, smooth transition to Microsoft Purview, I suppose?
Yeah, I think smooth transition to Microsoft Purview starts with, as I mentioned, two areas: a structured panel that ensures you are strategically aligned with your business operations and goals. Starting with quick wins to get started, but it's also important to make sure your journey to Purview, you utilize and align your deployment with your existing solutions that you have in place. So, for example, do a like-for-like or a compared implementation of security and protection solutions across the legacy tool you're replacing with Purview, and also understanding the limitations of Purview, because in certain legacy tools there isn't a like-for-like from an end user experience offering available within Purview. An example like that is the large file send within Mimecast. That's one legacy tool that we frequently move to Purview. There isn't really the same functionality with a portal-based solution for sharing large files as Mimecast have, but obviously Microsoft 365 has got the SharePoint and OneDrive collaboration features that you can allow users to securely share and collaborate in real-time documents. So getting that and ensuring that is then driven and user is educated. And that's also one of the important parts of your transition is user education and training, making sure that the migration is smooth.
Sorry, I caught myself on mute. Always going to happen at some point. Over to you, Chris, on this one then. What's your sort of approach, I guess, in identifying overlaps and redundancies when it comes to some of the stuff that Johan's mentioned there?
Yeah, I think one of the things to remember is, and which we see a lot because we also have quite a lot of content migration work that we do. The more you've invested into the platform, as it were, the more content you bring to the platform, the more you're leveraging the work you've already done. That's the beauty of a centralized platform. So, for example, if you've got a lot of data in file shares or in a third-party document management system, or you've got really critical data in some of these other sort of third-party systems. Sometimes quite a large part of the argument for bringing it over is to get it into that same controlled area. If we can't do it externally through a connector, as you mentioned. I think also the sort of that constant pressure on budgets is really almost self-policing. So we see a lot of our customers really going through their budgets and their spend year on year, and that often surfaces kind of overlapping spend quite quickly. So therefore, that then becomes strategic to start working at getting rid of those redundancies. Yes, those things reach it out quite quickly.
And then one of the things that springs to mind for me, Chris, is that resistance to change. How do you find organizations handle that resistance?
Yeah, I think Johan mentioned a little bit of it in change management's really important, particularly in some vertical industries that we work in. For example, legal, change management is really important and critical. For people to understand, the features and why they should be using the features and get that buy-in is really important. The other thing is where the strategic imperative is driven down from quite a senior place. If an organization's made the investment in, say, deploying generative AI, and they realize they need to get, Purview strategic imperatives out of the way to use it safely, and that's driven from quite a big cost. This is a big strategic decision with quite a big number associated with it. So I think having that driven down from a senior place and getting that buy-in it will kind of force through the requirements that need to be met and get people to do what they need to do, and that definitely helps.
Yeah, for sure. And then George, commercially, then you've been through this several times with our customers. If we had to make a comparison, say over 3 years between Purview and maybe third-party tools, what would be your feedback and take home from that?
Yeah, I think in the main, point solutions are significantly more expensive than the bundled pricing in the Microsoft Enterprise licensing. The previously mentioned redundancies and the fact that Microsoft licensing is usually an unavoidable and sunken cost makes for a very attractive ROI. That money's already been spent. Now we've just got to maximize it. And that's how we leverage more and more of the enterprise stack.
Yeah, makes complete sense. Thanks, guys. I guess what that does to me is really highlight the benefits of the ecosystem and bringing everything together under one roof, as it were. We're going to jump onto another different tool now. I want to shift it to get Nivasha back into the discussion a little bit on the compliance and governance side. So Nivasha, when we're talking about, I suppose I'm going to talk about reducing the cost of non-compliance here now. So that's tool 4 when you see it on the screen. But when we're talking about being able to identify the cost of non-compliance, what are the most common compliance risks you see or come across from your experience?
So I think the most common compliance risks, and not to sound like a broken record, because I think everyone's aware of it, would be data breaches, regulatory fines, and then of course reputational damage. And these risks obviously can arise from multiple places, but mostly from inadequate data protection measures and things like lack of employee awareness. Hence, I also highlighted insider risk earlier, as well as a failure to manage and adhere to your regulatory requirements. So often by implementing these strong controls or compliance controls and continuously monitoring your compliance posture, we often can mitigate that risk in order to ensure that an organization ultimately remains compliant. However, being able to identify and take the necessary steps around those compliance risks is often probably the biggest risk and the biggest hurdle for organizations to cross.
Yeah, and then how does Purview help? I guess what people want to find out is how Purview helps mitigate those risks proactively, I suppose.
I think what it does very effectively and proactively, incidentally, is providing automated compliance controls. So where there is this real-time monitoring, there's also comprehensive reporting, and that enables you to identify and address your compliance issues way before they escalate, ensuring that you remain compliant with your regulatory requirements, but also from a governance perspective, you're managing your data effectively and protecting your sensitive data.
And can you share some examples, Nivasha, where you've seen Purview help organizations proactively avoid fines and penalties? Like you come across that?
Sure. So I'm going to share, I think I can share some control examples. So what controls you could probably, leverage Purview to help you with. So often, most of our clients rather are looking to ensure that they're compliant with the GDPR. And more often than not, our clients are multi-geographic geographic organizations. So it's often the GDPR plus, 4 or 5 other pieces of legislation or standards like ISO 27001. So from a GDPR perspective, Microsoft Purview, it enables you to perform or to have in place automated data discovery and classification, and that thereby making it easier rather to identify and protect personal data across your environment. So for instance, with data loss prevention policies, it can be configured to detect and block the transfer of sensitive information, and that then directly supports the security of processing under the GDPR. So additionally, Purview, and I know Chris touched on this earlier as well, Purview assists with subject rights request workflows, and is really enables you to streamline your responses when it comes to your DSA or data subject access request, which again is a key GDPR requirement. And if I just touch on it from an ISO 27000 perspective, so if you look at Purview and you look at the wide variety of controls that you need to comply with in terms of to get ISO 27001 certification controls such as asset management or compliance as the standard provides, Purview helps you provide a complete inventory of your information assets and helps you to map that across sensitive data locations. So it's definitely providing you with this robust audit and reporting capabilities that definitely enable you to document access changes as well as data handling activities effectively. And this is critical for demonstrating compliance during audits. So customizable policy templates are also available, and continuous monitoring, as I've touched on a few times, to further allow organizations to adapt quickly as regulatory requirements evolve. So lastly, we've also been involved, again, just to touch on the e-discovery and the DSAR process. We've also been involved as an organization in several e-discovery processes with our clients, and that often allows us, or they often have the requirement that settles, or in order to settle or avoid certain cases that potentially could be catastrophic catastrophic or costly scenarios. So we've also seen this ability to be able to respond to DSARs effectively and with timeously really helps to boost a company's reputation, as well as in ensuring that their controls are working and robust.
Excellent. Thanks, Nivasha. And I've just picked up on a couple of questions, and I think the answer that you've just given, Ali, I think this comes from you in the Q&A section, where you've asked, beyond simply flagging issues, what proactive capabilities does Purview offer to help me prevent non-compliance events before they occur, rather than just reacting to them? So I think that covers that question pretty well, which is good. And we'll come to some of those questions as we see them. So that's all powerful points, I think. There, what it says to me is compliance isn't just a legal checkbox; it's a more of a business enabler. Is how I would look at it. Chris, coming back to you on that, and again looking at some of the features, how would you say you use something like compliance manager templates to guide and measure progress?
Yeah, so Nivasha and I will often engage with GRC teams that are using traditionally an Excel spreadsheet or even a third-party tool to kind of track where you are. And what compliance manager is, and just maybe not everybody knows what it is it's essentially a built-in tool that's connected to your tenant. And what it's doing is it has access to all your security settings, it has access to your compliance settings, and it takes an inventory of those things. It then has built-in templates, all the most commonly used regulations across the world and standards. And it really allows you to monitor your progress and where you are. So it can kind of tell you, it can give you sort of a low-hanging fruit list of what to address first. It gives you a score. It also gets the settings, Microsoft 365 being a hosted solution, it also takes the measurement of the things Microsoft's doing for you. So, whether it's some things like data center security, that's not your problem with a Microsoft license. So these things all need to be in your, to check that you're complying with a regulation or a standard. Many times these things. So it's really giving you that inventory and then giving you a score against that. We actually use Compliance Manager to measure our progress with a customer. So, if a customer engages our services to on governance, risk, and compliance, and we start doing one of our programs, we take that score because it's an independent score that we can't affect, and that helps us show and measure progress by using that score and also using the recommendations against the things that we actually use something called the Microsoft Security Baseline Template. And that template's a combination of, I think it's NIST, CSF, ISO, FedRAMP, and GDPR. So it's a really good place to start. It's running in every single Office 365 enterprise customer's tenant, whether they like it or not. So it's there measuring you. You just have to go and click on it and see how you're doing. And it's a really great place and convenient tool, kind of replacing often a spreadsheet. And it even allows you to collaborate with people. So if you're waiting for a document or, if you're waiting for something that you need from a risk or compliance perspective, it might be a document, might not even be a setting. You can actually do that collaboration inside the tool. So really useful from that perspective.
Yeah, and then extending on that, I'm thinking of the role of insider risk management in compliance. Chris, can you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, and I saw there was one in the Q&A there. So yeah absolutely. I think the insider risk is a large portion of incidents are accountable to insider risks, either maliciously or inadvertently. And what we've seen is, and Microsoft, in fact, built this tool to deploy on themselves. And in what it's done is it's taken kind of the kinds of behaviors and combinations of behaviors, and it's using machine learning to actually help you quickly apply a template against those things. We actually work with our sister company who are forensic analysts. They do a lot of forensic analysis and e-discovery. And we've landed up deploying insider risk as part of fraud risk management programs. Lots of our customers need to be showing and need to be running proactive fraud risk management programs to address things like procurement fraud, intellectual property theft, things that are really significant in their lives. And certainly what you find is the more of the Purview tools you've deployed, the better the insider risk is as well, because it also leverages the other things you may have done with DLP or information protection. It will then increase the risks against those things, but largely automated and scalable, and a really good way of proactively managing your fraud risk management requirements.
Perfect. Thanks, Chris. I'm going to jump a little bit because I'm unconscious of the time. We're getting to 10 to 1 here now. So I want this to come across on the session around a specific case study that we've done in the ebook and the ROI document. So I'm going to come back to you, Johan, on that and ask you to just walk us through that case study, because I think it's powerful when some of the people in the audience are listening to a real world case study around this. So if you can talk us through what we've written in the ROI document, that would be great, Johan.
Yeah, absolutely, Gethan. This case study is a great example of how Microsoft Purview, when deployed strategically, can deliver measurable or return on investments and compliance maturity. Our client, a global energy and chemicals company with 50,000 users across 3 regions, South Africa, Europe, and America, was facing a complex regulatory landscape and rapid data growth, obviously also with requirements for compliance boundaries when adopting solutions like Purview e-discovery. And they've already invested within Microsoft Purview and E5 licensing, but they were struggling to gain traction due to limited in-house expertise and some slow decision-making processes. I think that's where our compliance panel came in. We established a recurring forum that brought together key stakeholders from IT, security, and compliance. And this panel accelerated the decision making and ensured that Purview deployment aligned with business goals. One of the first major wins, as previously alluded to, was the deployment of sensitivity labeling and information protection through specific work streams. These initially helped the organization classify and protect sensitive data more effectively, improving their compliance posture almost immediately. Then over the course of a year or so, the organization saw further improved compliance maturity, faster and more informed decisions through the compliance panel and the reporting feedback loop. And also then the ability to demonstrate actual return on their license investment through the impact of the deployment of Purview solutions. And the journey didn't stop there. With this foundation strongly set in place, they expanded and started utilizing advanced features like communication, compliance, and insider risk management that moved from a reactive to a preventative solution utilizing machine learning. And that really also alluded to them or pointed them to expanding their scope by integrating data from other sources, utilizing the Purview data connectors. And all of this contributed to a long-term return on investment that is operational with operational resiliency.
Yeah, thanks, Johan. And I guess just expanding on it, what would you say the key success factors in that deployment were?
From my perspective, there were 3 main key success factors in this deployment. The first was the compliance panel. I think it was foundational. It brought together, as I mentioned, various stakeholders from the organization across IT, security, and business decision makers. And that ensures that Purview could be deployed in a way that was supported the organization's business goals. The structure helped overcome the usual delays caused by siloed decision making. I think the second key factor is targeted work streams for each of the Purview solutions. And we focused our efforts, as I mentioned before, deploying default sensitivity labeling, but then moving to proper deployment through dedicated work stream for the other Purview solutions. As I mentioned, assisting them with adopting e-discovery, and because of their geographic disparity, they needed to deploy solutions, advanced solutions within Purview, like the compliance boundaries, ensuring each geographic region across Africa, America, and Europe could utilize e-discovery and only perform investigations and searches across their users in that region, so aligning with their regulatory and compliance requirements. And that really built the confidence into the tool to assure that the ongoing maturity can, from the compliance perspective, can be achieved with further development and adoption of Purview. I think the third key factor is our ongoing support and maturity planning. So through the panel, the deployment is not a once-off project. Cloud Essentials Accelerator Program, we provide ongoing support, including monthly health checks and advisory services. As we mentioned before, as Chris mentioned, look for the reporting, how the tooling is being used, and utilizing that metrics to ensure the organization could continue to make decisions and mature the use of their Purview with informed decisions, and expanding, and that allowed them to expand into other areas, as I mentioned before. So these factors together really help the client move forward with their adoption and return on investment.
Perfect. Thanks, Johan. And I know we're getting close to the hour. So but I do want Navasha to come in just quickly, and that's going to be difficult for you, I know, Navasha, to do it quickly. But just touch on that compliance panel and the accelerated decision making. If you can do that quickly for me, and then I'll try and wrap it up after that.
Yes, sure. So I think Johan and Chris have covered parts of what I'm going to say, throughout this webinar as well. And I think, if anything, it's just as important for teams focused on your company rules, risks, regulatory priorities, to also stay in contact with the people who actually manage the technology. So when these groups cooperate in a setting like the compliance panel, it's easier for them to spot problems earlier on, but also to see what's working effectively earlier on as well, and then come together to enhance the existing controls, and also improve on what needs to be improved on, to not only improve your legal requirements and from a regulatory perspective, but also overall as a governance for your data governance holistically. So working together this way really helps an organization connect your company policies, because there's a lot of those, right? There's many pieces of paper, but now connecting them with real world actions and just making sure that your safeguards and your controls are stronger and more reliable throughout the organization, and not just within your GRC team.
Perfect. Thanks, Navasha. And I think what's obvious to me here is how this real world story brings together all those personas that we speak about, sort of tech, governance, commercial, and shows what's possible when they collaborate, which is certainly the way that we know and talk to a lot at Cloud Essentials. I'm going to rush it a little bit. We didn't quite know how this was going to work out timing wise because of the open discussion type forum. So I'm just going to try and wrap it up, as we've got a minute or two just before. So after, can we move on to the next slide, please, Navasha? And I'll just, we have had some questions, but I think looking at them, we've kind of covered them as we've gone along as well, but we will refer to those and we'll come back to individuals as we can. But I just wanted to give you a quick glimpse into our world, I suppose. So these are some of the projects that we're currently running with, and all on the journey of our Data Governance Accelerator program. So all of these have in common their, things like global reach, size, regulated industry status. They all place high value on their content and, of course, their investment in Microsoft. But that's pretty much where the similarities sort of end. And I say that because they all represent a broad range of industries, and each with their own complexities in terms of things like data governance maturity and needs. But again, in common, what they all did was they selected Cloud Essentials to partner them on this journey because of our unique approach that we've touched upon today and expertise. And it's why we've become this sort of go-to partner, if you like, when it comes to data governance from Microsoft. So just want to say thank you so much for the audience for joining us. Thanks for the team for the discussion. We really hope you enjoyed the more conversational format. It's something we're experimenting with. We'd love to get some feedback, so let us know about your thoughts on this if you've got some time. If we just quickly flick on to the next slide, please, Navasha, I'll just mention quickly what we've got coming up next. So we've got a Copilot webinar in September, which is Unlock Copilot's Full Potential. So do look out for that and sign up for it. We've also got a special guest speaker from Microsoft for that one, so promises to be a good one. And on that note, I've sped through the last bit because of time. Thanks for everyone's time today, and we'll see you on the next call. Cheers, team.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.